Good afternoon. Today we'll be dealing with screening procedures in gynecology. So there are some topics in which screening procedures are useful, but mostly it is in the gynecological cancer that we do screening. So what is screening? You must have already dealt in community medicine about it. Screening is a strategy or a method used in a population to identify the possible presence of an as yet undiagnosed disease in individuals without symptoms or signs. That means the disease may be there in that individual, but there are no symptoms or signs. So this can include individuals with pre-symptomatic or sometimes unrecognized symptomatic disease. So there are some tests have to be done for screening. So this screening test is done to detect potential health disorders or diseases in people who do not have any symptom of that particular disease. The goal in screening is early detection of a disease so that the lifestyle changes can be made in the individual. Screening test can also be used for surveillance of a particular disease. It can be used to reduce the risk of the disease or to detect it early enough to treat it. This is especially applicable in cases of gynecological cancers so that the prognosis is better. So the earlier the gynecological cancer is detected, the success rate becomes quite high. So there are requirements for prospective screening programs. These screening programs are always prospective, they cannot be retrospective. So there are certain WHO requirements for screening programs. So the condition for which we are doing screening should pose an important health problem. So nowadays, like COVID-19 is an important health problem. But whether this screening can be done for this particular disease, it has to fulfill the certain other criteria. So the natural history of the disease should be well understood. That is the second criteria for the prospective screening programs. Is the COVID-19 natural history is well understood? It is not well understood. So it doesn't fulfill this criteria. So there should be, the third criteria is there should be a recognizable early stage. And there should be adequate facilities for the diagnosis and treatment of the abnormalities detected. So are there adequate facilities for COVID-19 for the diagnosis and treatment? They are not there. So this criteria also doesn't fulfill. Similarly, the third criteria also doesn't fulfill in the case of COVID-19. There should be a suitable, acceptable test for detection of that particular disease. And the cost of the screening program should be balanced against the benefit it provides. So cost effectiveness also has to be taken into consideration when we are thinking of doing any prospective screening program. So there are certain criteria for the screening test to be fulfilled. The criteria include that it should be simple, it should be sensitive, that is the probability of the test to be positive is high when the disease is present. It should be specific, that means the probability of the test to be negative when the disease is absent. Then it should be capable of being performed by the paramedics. So that means it should be simple and it should be cheap so that it doesn't burden the government, and it should be acceptable to population so that the invasive testing is a no-no in case of the screening test. And it should be accurate and it should be repeatable. That means it should be we should be able to do it repeatedly and to this thing so that the same result is obtained by doing the repeated testing. So there are various primary methods of prevention. This also you must have already dealt in community medicine. One is primary, secondary and tertiary. Why we are dealing it over here? So that screening is also one of the methods of prevention. So primary prevention include avoidance of the precipitating and risk factor for that particular condition. And counseling is another primary method. And vaccination like smallpox vaccination, polio vaccination. These are the primary methods of prevention of that particular disease. Then secondary screening is that the disease perhaps is already present, but it has not been detected, so that we are screening so that we can detect it at early stage. So the screening method which we are discussing today is the secondary method of prevention. Then there is a third tertiary method of prevention in which when the disease is already evident, then we do treatment or mitigation of damage where the disease causes is done in the tertiary method of prevention. So coming back to the secondary prevention, that is screening, which we are dealing today. Let's repeat that it is a systematic application of a test in an asymptomatic person to identify preclinical lesion. So it's a systematic application in an asymptomatic person. So the types of screening include the selective screening or mass screening. Selective screening is done if there are a high risk group. Suppose somebody is a smoker or alcoholic or something like that. In those high risk groups for a particular disease, this will be called as selective type of screening. And when we are screening the whole population, then it's a mass screening. So screening and gynecology, as I said earlier, usually it is more specifically for gynecological cancer. Though the screening which we are doing usually is for the cervical cancer. The other carcinomas include breast cancer, endometrial cancer, and ovarian cancer. So carcinoma cervix, that is the most common condition for which we are doing screening. So carcinoma cervix is the commonest lower genital tract cancer. Worldwide, it is the fourth most common cancer in female. The first being breast, then colorectal cancer, the lung cancer, and the carcinoma cervix is the fourth most common carcinoma cervix. It's the fourth most common cancer in females. So in India, it comes after the breast cancer. It is the second most common cancer in India. So current age standardized rate all over the world is 2 to 75 per 1 lakh per annum, an average being 13.1 cases per 1 lakh per annum. In India, the range varies from about 5 to 23 per 1 lakh women per annum. And most frequently it is diagnosed at the age of 35 to 45, but the median age for this particular condition is 50 years. Since 1980s, in developing countries, the incidence of carcinoma cervix has been decreasing because of the various screening procedures which they have used, whereas this has not happened in developing countries. That's why the incidence of carcinoma cervix has not decreased to that extent as in the developed countries. So you have already dealt with the carcinoma cervix. The main causative factor for carcinoma cervix is supposed to be human papilloma virus. So let's discuss in brief about the basic virology of HPV. So this has got a causative role in nearly all cervical neoplasia and a significant proportion of vulvar, vaginal and anal neoplasia also. So this infects human squamous or metaplastic epithelial cells, that is got a epitheliotropic mode towards the epithelium it attacks. It's a double-stranded DNA virus with a protein capsid which is unique to it, and it is a sexually transmitted disease, and more than 100 stereotypes of HPV have been identified. About 1/3 of this HPV type specifically infect the genital tract. So oncological potential of HPV types, it may be non-oncogenic or oncogenic. The non-oncogenic HPV types include 6, 11, which we had discussed when we were dealing with the benign lesions of vulva and vagina. That means it is a causative factor in the condylomata acuminata, that is the genital warts. The other non-oncogenic include 42, 43, 44. The oncogenic potential is this variety of HPV is mainly 16 and 18, and others include 31, 35, 33, 35, etc. So what is the natural history of cervical cancer? So you have already dealt with it in carcinoma cervix, but still let us repeat it. Whenever there is an exposure to the HPV on the normal uterus, or here we can say the cervix, there is a transient infection occurs. This also you have already dealt with, but we'll be dealing it with again later on. So, and most of it is again eliminated. That means from the transient infection, usually it doesn't, few progress, but majority will regress and it will become a normal cervix. And from here, if the infection, few cases may progress to a precancerous lesion, and here at this stage also there can be regression. That means from CIN2 it can become CIN1 and again normal. And once it reaches, however, the regression rate is less from this to this. That means from CIN3 to CIN2 to CIN1 as compared to from CIN1 to normal, where the regression rate is much higher. So if it advances further, if there is a persistent infection of HPV, this can go into invasive lesion. That means it becomes a carcinoma. So again the same thing is being explained by another diagram. It's HPV like is exposure related. Suppose there's a risk factors which you are already dealt in carcinoma cervix, like multiple sexual partners, early sexual debut, or high parity, and no circumcision. If it is there and the HPV attacks, then the basal cells of the cervix, they are infected. So it takes about more than 1 year from the normal cervix to become a low-grade squamous lesion if the HPV infection is there. So, but some of them will regress back to the normal cervix. So if the high risk factors persist and the HPV infection is still there, like high risk HPV infection, if there is a weak immune response or other STIs are present or genetic preponderance is there, it can progress to low grade squamous intraepithelial lesion. So that usually takes more than 4 to 5 years. And if the further persistent infection is there, it can lead to high grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, which takes more than 10 years, and ultimately leading into cervical cancer, where when the more the number of risk factor and the persistent the infection, chances of going into cervical cancer are more, where the whole of the this thing epithelium is in this thing changed. So, however, the regression, the good factor is that whenever the HPV infection is there, the regression is occurring in 90% of the cases. So, in the natural history of low-grade HPV cervical lesion, this is related to the sexual behavior, and as we dealt earlier, there is a high spontaneous remission rate. So, depending upon the age of the patient, the mean time of progression from low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion to high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion is about 77 to about 78 months in cases of 31 to 65 years, whereas it's slightly higher. It takes longer in cases of women who are 16 to 30 years. So it takes approximately 88 months from the low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion to go to the high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion. So it takes about 10 to 30 years from HPV infection to cervical cancer. So it's a very long period. So in this period, if we are able to detect the low-grade or high-grade intraepithelial lesion, the patient can be cured much better, and the prognosis of that patient will be quite good. So what are the precancerous lesions of the cervix and methods used for the cervical cancer screening? So they are mostly it is the cytology. It can be a conventional cytology, that is pap smear, or liquid based cytology, which again can be a manual interpretation or automated screening, or it's a high risk HPV DNA, or visual inspection after acetic acid, also called as VIA, or visual inspection after acetic acid with magnification, that is VIAM, or visual inspection after Lugol's iodine, then colposcopy, cervicography, and then there are certain investigational strategy which is polar probe and laser induced fluorescence. This we are not going to deal with, but these we are going to deal with today. So there's a cytological screening for cervical cancer. It should be performed in all sexually active women beginning at the age of 21 years. So women aged between 21 to 29 should have a pap test or the pap smear every 3 years. HPV testing should not be used for screening in this age group unless it is needed as after an abnormal pap test result. And this pap test may be combined with HPV testing in women who are more than 30 years of age. So again, in the tabular form, the same thing is being repeated. 21 to 29 years, onset screening at 21 years, pap test every 3 years, no routine HPV high-risk subtype testing. So between the age of 30 to 65 years, pap test with HPV co-testing every 5 years or pap test alone every 3 years, and after the age of 65 years, no screening following adequate negative testing, that is 3 consecutive normal pap smears are there. Then after the age of 65 years, the cervical cytological screening for carcinoma cervix is not required. So then when we are doing cervical cytology, sensitivity and specificity, in the initial slides, if you remember, it should be whatever screening methods we apply, it should be sensitive and specific. So what is the overall sensitivity of cervical cytology? It is 61 to 80%, and overall specificity is 60 to 99.4% with the new technology, which is quite high. And automation for cervical screening can be used in the liquid-based cytology or thin layer preparation, which eliminates the air-dried artifact, inflammatory cells, blood and mucus. And HPV testing combined with a pap smear improves screening. So how do we perform a pap test? Ideally, patients are scheduled to avoid menstruation, and then patients should abstain from vaginal intercourse, douching, vaginal tampon use and intravaginal medicinal or contraceptive creams for a minimum of 24 to 48 hours. Pap testing, however, is not deferred due to unexplained discharge or unscheduled bleeding, as these may be signs of cervical or other genital tract cancer. Sometimes there's a tendency of not doing pap test if there is a discharge, but we need not defer it. So this is how the pap smear is taken. We introduce a speculum over here, and then the cells are scraped from the cervix and examined under a microscope to check for the disease or other problems. And the patient has to be in the lithotomy position. After the smear is made over the slide, then it's put in the fixative. Either it can be put like this, and again the next slide I'll be showing you what is the other method of fixation. So this is the air spatula and this is the cytobrush with which we take a pap smear. This is a cervix brush which is used for the liquid based cytology, which again we'll be dealing with in the subsequent slides. So this is how the thing is collected. When first we collect it with the air spatula, it is put into the endocervical canal. The longer one goes inside the cervical canal, the shorter projection goes outside, so that the little bit of the lower part of the endocervical canal and the outside of cervix, portio vaginalis, is covered up. It is air spatula is rotated by 360 degrees and the sample is taken. This diagram shows the collection with a swab, which usually is done during pregnancy if required. This is the air spatula and this is the cytobrush. Cytobrush is introduced into the cervical canal so that the endocervical cells can be collected with it. Here it is rotated by 180 degree and taken out, and then the slide is made. So fixation, once the smear is made, the fixation is done immediately with a fixative with the 95% alcohol, which is then introduced into the Koplik's jar, which we had shown earlier. This is the Koplik's jar to which this fixative, already there is a fixative 95% ethanol to which the slide is put, or fixation can be done with a Cytofix spray to avoid air drying. So once the smear is made, immediately it has to be fixed. It should not be left dry, otherwise the cells, the interpretation will not be correct. So spray should be kept at about 10 inches to avoid distraction of the cells by propellant in the spray, and it should be monolayer for proper penetration of the cell surface by a fixative. So when not to take a cervical smear. So if there is a blood in the vagina or in the cervix, usually because of menstruation, then we should avoid taking pap smear. Or there is an obvious growth on the cervix. That means the probability of it being carcinoma is much more. So in these cases, the biopsy would be more appropriate than a pap smear. And in some cases where the cervix cannot be seen, especially in the perimenopausal women, or if there is any surgery which has happened on the cervix, then in those cases pap smear cannot be taken. So how do we report once the pap smear is taken? The first, whether the smear is satisfactory or unsatisfactory reporting. Whether it is normal, that is if it's a negative for intraepithelial lesion, and whether there is infection present or not. If the infection is present, or the organism has to be specified. Whether it is benign, that means the reactive or reparative cellular changes are there in the smear. And then it can be an ascus, that is the atypical squamous cells of undetermined significance. In these cases, there is not a typical intraepithelial lesion is seen, but it's not absolutely normal also. In those cases, the follow-up, earlier follow-up is required. Or it can be an ASCH, that is atypical squamous cells, where the high-grade intraepithelial lesion cannot be excluded. Other lesions are low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, and the squamous cell carcinoma. So this is how the Bethesda system of reporting is used, which is being used nowadays. There were other methods of reporting which was done earlier. So it could be dysplasia was the term used earlier, cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, which was the terms being used earlier. So in this, ascus fits into the squamous with HPV atypia. The lower grade squamous intraepithelial lesion is like CIN1 of earlier days, or mild dysplasia, or grade 3 of original Papanicolaou system of reporting. Then high grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, which can be either CIN2 or CIN3, that means moderate dysplasia, severe dysplasia, and carcinoma in situ of dysplasia classification, which is the grade 3 and grade 4 of Papanicolaou staging. Then the squamous cell carcinoma, which is a grade 5 of the original Papanicolaou system of reporting. So nowadays we are using the Bethesda system of reporting. So that is how the reporting is done. So there is inflammatory changes with atypia, which could be due to vaginitis or infection such as Moniliia, Trichomonas, herpes, or condyloma. So here treat the cause and repeat the smear after 4 to 6 months to ensure that the dysplastic cells were not masked by the previous inflammatory cells. So follow-up in cases of low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, only about 1% of low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion are associated with cancer. The option is repeat the smear at 4 to 6 months interval after treating any infection if they're present. And in case of follow-up of high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, it should be done by colposcopy or a biopsy or colposcopically directed biopsy of an abnormal area. So the liquid-based cytology, this type of cervix brush is used. This goes inside the cervical canal and this is over the portio vaginalis. So this is rotated 5 times in a clockwise direction, and that's how when the cervix, the cells are transferred over to the cervix brush. And HPV testing is carried out in the laboratory on the residue of liquid in the pot after cytology screening. And infection control procedures need to be thorough when the liquid-based cytology is being done. So liquid-based cytology, these specimens are received in the special vials so that they contain special solution to preserve the cells. The basic principles are the vacuum and special filtering with the collection of diagnostic material at the center of the slide. So this is how it is done, and then imprint is taken on the defined area. It is the fixed pap stain, or it may be dried with a MMG, that is May Grunwald Giemsa stain. And though the cells are the same, However, the artifacts are excluded in case of the liquid-based cytology. So the next method, if there are some changes in the pap smear, then we can go for colposcopy. It's an in situ examination in the cervix with a low magnification, that is 6 to 16 times a microscope. An important step in the diagnosis of pre-invasive lesions of the cervix. Here the aim is to study the cervix when the pap smear detects abnormal cells, to locate abnormal areas and take a biopsy from that abnormal colposcopically directed biopsy. Conservative surgery can be done under colposcopic guidance in pre-invasive lesions of the cervix, and follow-up of conservative therapy cases can be done by colposcopy, because once it's magnified, the better visualization is there. So examination, there are two major components: one the general assessment and the specific colposcopic findings are there. So careful examination of these findings is important. And in the general colposcopic assessment has got three components: one the cervix visualization, then the squamicolumnar junction visibility should be there, and transformation zone classification should be there when we are doing colposcopy. So like we said earlier, the squamicolumnar junction visibility is important. So then only we can do biopsy or anything. So entire squamicolumnar junction and the upper limits of all lesions is essential. Then transformation zone, visibility of transformation zone is also important. So this was the original squamicolumnar junction. This is a new squamicolumnar junction. The area in between is the transformation zone. Here also this is the original the squamicolumnar junction, and this is the new squamicolumnar junction. This is the transformation zone where most of the neoplastic changes occur. So the cervical crypts are at the end of this this original squamicolumnar junction. So the cervix visibility, squamicolumnar junction, and the transformation zone visibility is important when we are doing colposcopy. So in this one, patient is put in the dorsal lithotomy position. The patient is cleaned and draped, and cusco speculum is put, and the focus of colposcope on the portia vaginalis, then cleaned with saline and apply 3 to 5% acetic acid. Why do we apply? So the abnormal areas appear as the acetowhite areas. So what does the acetic acid do? It coagulates the nuclear protein, preventing the light to pass through the epithelium. So it becomes an opaque thing, and the white visibility is because of the more of nuclei in the abnormal region, and that's why the higher nuclear density, the higher concentration of protein, it becomes the white intensity is increased. So this denotes the acetowhite areas, and this colposcopy, what it does, it reduces the false positive findings, and it uses a triage to rule out the high grade lesions. So the one is of course the acetowhite areas which can be seen. Then there can be a mosaic pattern, the punctuation, and abnormal cells can be visualized on colposcopy. So the other method thing which can be done in case of colposcopy is application of the Lugol's iodine. Here the abnormal areas are seen as iodine negative areas. This thing then you can take the biopsy from the edge of the abnormal areas, which whenever the basic principle of biopsy taking should be followed, it should include small part of the normal areas in the biopsy. So when we are using the Schiller's iodine or the Lugol's iodine, it's a normal mature squamous epithelium contains abundant glycogen. So whenever this Schiller's or Lugol's iodine is applied over the cervix, if it is a normal area, then it produces dark brown stain or the mahogany brown stain. An abnormal epithelium contains relatively little or no glycogen. That's why it remains relatively unstained. So in cases of in case of acetic acid, it was the presence of acetowhite areas which is abnormal. In case of Lugol's iodine, it's the absence of the brown areas that shows the abnormal areas. So in visual inspection after Lugol's iodine, that is called as VILI. And on application of this thing, normal cervical epithelium is staining dark brown or mahogany brown over here. And multiple punch biopsies are taken from the unstained areas. This is the unstained areas, and this is the acetowhite area when the acetic acid was applied. So cervical screening among the specific population, if there is a history of abnormal pap and women with history of CIN2 or higher should continue to undergo age-based screening for 20 years after the initial post-treatment surveillance period. So in cases of pregnancy, it's to be performed only if indicated, usually be avoided, and colposcopy may be deferred in these cases. In case of previous hysterectomy, if no previous history of CIN2 higher, routine cytology screening and HPV testing should be discontinued in cases of hysterectomy. However, if these are present, then it should be continued. Then women who have received HPV vaccine, should they be screened or not according to the same line? It said that they should be screened according to the same guidelines as women who have not been vaccinated. The vaccine does not provide immunity against all HPV types responsible for cervical cancer. Mostly like the cervix vaccine provides protection against 6, 11, 16 and 18 only. And through 10 years of follow-up from the clinical trials, there has been no evidence of waning protection after 3-dose series of HPV vaccine. And the last in the case of cervical screening is a cervicography. It is a diagnostic medical procedure in which a non-physician takes pictures of the cervix and submits it to a physician. It's an intermediate-based procedure, and it goes to the concerned physician. And the physician, this is also a screening test for cervical cancer and is a complementary to the pap smear. The physician is sitting in some other place, and then he or she interprets that picture taken by a non-physician individual.